7 participants. Welcome. This is the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida group. This is our study group for January 25th of 2024. This is our 104th study group. Today we're going to interview Bob Churchill on his framework and the many things that make up the Bob Churchill universe. Our mission here at the Tampa Bay IIBA Florida chapter is to bridge the gap between industry leaders and business analysts by building partnerships with professionals, educators, and employers so that we may empower, instruct, and engage the BA community. We have a worldwide study group, so welcome. If you're watching live, welcome live. And if you're watching the recording, welcome. Let us know you're watching. Send us a message on LinkedIn. We would really like to get that encouragement. As you know, we don't charge for these study groups. Your encouragement is what we live on. We've given you a variety of ways to reach us. As I said, this is our Thursday night study group from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern every Thursday night. We also have LinkedIn groups, Meetup, Zoom. This Zoom is the same Zoom every single week. We have study group materials on our Google Drive. We have Meetup recordings, and we have the IIBA site. We also have Bob Churchill's site, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Watermark Learning has been our constant companion throughout this experience. They've given us a discount code of Tampa Space 21 for their products. They have flashcards and practice study questions and classes, all kinds of things, but they'll give you 20% off if you use that discount code. We are a volunteer-led organization. Our leadership, we have Cliff here. He's in the Millennium Falcon over here. Yulia is not with us tonight. Uche is, I don't know if Uche's online or not. Vivian is probably around here somewhere. Bob is right here. He's going to be speaking tonight. And my name is Thea Soren. I'm the Vice President of Career and Professional Development. If you're interested in being on our board, reach out to me on LinkedIn. We'll put you to work on something that you'll like. We have three study group advisors. Bob is here tonight as our CBAP in residence. Having a CBAP here means that you get your education credit for this hour. Uche has recently joined us as a CBAP in residence and on our board, so welcome her. We also have a variety of people that have earned their certification, reached out to us and said we couldn't have done it without you. So that's really exciting for us. If you're needing to be added to that list, reach out so we can put you on our board of brags. We are talking about 3 of the 7 certifications offered by the IIBA. We have the CBA, the CCBA, and the CBAP certifications. If you're interested in any of those, this is the class for you. If you're interested in any of the other ones, we know that you can learn things from this class, but there are advanced things that you can do after you get your CBAP to earn these additional 4. They generally take about a weekend of studying to get. We started out January with Cliff talking about data, moving huge amounts of data around. Then we had Rohit talking about using data in Excel and slicers, which I was personally excited about. Last week, we had Kathy Gaston talking about business architecture. And this week, we're going to have Bob Churchill talking about his many practices areas are converging. Also, Bob has given us his website, rpchurchill.com. This is what I talked about earlier. Huge amounts of information there. I encourage you to go just explore. He also has done an immense amount of work to organize our records, our recordings, and an index page, which is right here. We'll drop all of this in the chat for you. What this does is it allows you to say, hey, I'm studying chapter 4 in the BABOK. Where are the recordings of the practice study questions for chapter 4? He's put it all in one place. You can click it and go to that part of the recording. It's quite wonderful. Next week, we're going to talk to Cliff Gray about networking, LinkedIn, and self-marketing. If you don't know, Cliff has thousands of connections in his network, and he uses LinkedIn like a composer. He does all of our marketing for us, and he brings in lots of people because he's figured out how to reach them and a system that works. So he's going to talk about that. On February 8th, Heather Noggle is going to come talk about security for business analysts, coming from a very basic of what is security that we need to know, what are things like single sign-on and basic password security, to what are the things we need to be looking for to be bringing up to our architecture and our security folks that are problems or concerns, especially with the new privacy laws that are coming up. Some of that has to do with security. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to talk about his architecture, and I'll stop sharing. Bob, it is yours.
Okay.
I'm always excited whenever I stop sharing. I can see everybody. It's like, hi, guys. Okay, I'll stop now. Go, Bob.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Very odd. That's what's up. All right, getting there.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so I have a huge amount of material on these slides and a bunch of slides. So given that, and also the limitations on how well, quickly, and smoothly I'm able to speak, I'm gonna try to blow through them and give you an overview. You can find the slides linked there are in the reveal.js framework. So they're directly hosted on my website. There are a lot of live links. I will post a link in the chat for how you can get there, or somebody else can do it. They're on the portfolio page of my website under presentations. This one right now is all at the bottom. So I spent most of my career doing computer simulation. There are three major kinds. There's continuous simulation and discrete event simulation. Those are two of the major kinds. And in order to build these, you have to know the code. You have to understand the system that you're going to simulate. You have to understand what customers need. So I developed all the skills a business analyst needs in a wide variety of industries, applications, and architecture. One thing I'll point out is that any place on these slides you see an orange item, or I guess they'll be blue if you're going to them the first time, that's a link to either a blog post or a presentation or a page on my website or some other web page or a Wikipedia article. And many of those have further links. So there's a ton of stuff you can dig into, even if I don't talk about it. So if we're going to solve a problem, either as an individual or team, what do we have to do? And this really happens almost no matter the scope or scale of the project, what it really involves, whether it's a product or project, whether it's we're building something new or modifying something that already exists, here are the things we do. We kind of plan the effort. We figured out what the thing is going to be used for. We figure out the limitations and assumptions and risks having to do with it. We come up with a conceptual model. This is interesting because the primary way we think of conceptual modeling is what's going on now. We want to come up with some representation of what's going on now, but we also do concept models of the future state and the implementation and a lot of things. So this really comes up in any order in the process. I have to present these things in a given order the first time through. I always like to say that I did swing dancing for 16 years, and I could teach you how to do the basics in 5 minutes. And you can spend the rest of your life figuring out how to do it better, how to do variations, what is or is not this and that dance, but you have to start somewhere. And then you figure out what's going on in terms of data. What do you need? Where do you get it? How do you make sure it's accurate? How do you make sure it's complete? How do you make sure it's representative and usable? Then you figure out the requirements. So if you remember, we had the as is state, what's going on now, if there is one. If you're building something new, there won't be one, and you'll kind of start with requirements. There are basically two kinds of requirements, functional and non-functional. I'll get into that, but that's an abstract form of the to-be state. Then you do design, that's a detailed form of the to-be state. Implementation actually creates or modifies so you get to the new state. Then you do testing. There are two kinds of testing. Then you do acceptance, and then you close the whole thing out. So all those things happen. Again, no matter the scope, scale, situation, or whatever, the bigger the project is and the more complex it is, the more involved all these things are going to be, and the more you need to know about each phase. And even if you do a really simple thing, you're still doing all this stuff. You may just gloss over it implicitly, but all these things always happen. So where does that approach come from? So I talked about how I have decades of experience. I also learned a bunch from a talk a friend of mine gave on domain-driven design, and that gave me that list of items almost fully formed from that talk. Then I gleaned some more information from military standard used for doing V&V of simulations by the Navy and Marine Corps. And then over the last, say, 7, 8 years, I guess, maybe 6, I've been thinking about this and extending it and refining it across a ton of material at conferences and online videos and learning from the conversations we have here. So I learn as much from you as you hopefully you do from me. So if we're going to streamline and simplify this, in reality, we only have 6 phases plus data. So intended uses, what are we doing it for? Conceptual model is what's going on. Then we have data, and there's more to be said about that. Then we have requirements, then we have design, implementation, and test. And so really that's all there is to it. Everything in business, analysis, and many other practices works the same way. So whether you're doing waterfall, the idea is that you're gonna do all the steps more or less in order. And for trivial efforts, you can do that. That'll kind of work. But for anything that's complex, there's always a lot of fiddling around and going back. There's a ton of trial and error and iteration and communication, and that's always been the case. Now, and then obviously we have any of the forms of agile. So we take the first 3 phases, find out what's going on, find out what people need, throw it in a backlog that is actively groomed and refined and reprioritized. And then we plug items off there to be dealt with and put into the wild. There are also hybrid approaches where you kind of know what target you're shooting at and you do a high level design, and then you do kind of a scrummy approach during the implementation as things work out. And so there's a lot of ways to do things. Again, we have the situation if you have an existing project that your existing situation that you're going to improve, do discovery and data collection, the as is at the beginning. And if not, if you're doing something new, you do it kind of during the design phase. All the things still happen, it's just a question of when. And there are a lot of cases you use simulations to aid your design work. In a simulation is really an entire self-contained project on its own, embedded within the larger effort to solve whatever problem. So I always show, and many of you have seen this, that in reality, all these phases, you iterate within them. So think about doing discovery and data collection to discover the as is state. That's the simplest one to understand. You go out and you find out what's going on. You draw it on diagrams and take data tables, and you have the customers reviewing and all the process participants, and they say, well, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. So then you fix it and you have them review it again, and you keep doing that until you agree that everything is complete and correct. So that is iterating within a phase, and that happens in all the phases. What you also do is iterate between phases, and the biggest one here is implementation and test. right? And you're all aware of this. You build something, you send it for testing, they say this is good, that's not. You change the implementation, you send it back to test, you do that until it spits out the end, right? But in reality, anything you learn downstream may say, here's some other thing we missed upstream, maybe in what's going on now. Maybe we missed a requirement. Maybe we missed a design element. Maybe we put together capabilities that are so cool we can do new things we hadn't thought of before. So we add those into new previous phases. So ideally, we will track this across all the phases, every item. And the reason we do this is to A, keep track of everything, and B, make sure it's targeted to and responsive to the intended use. If we're doing something that isn't part of the project and isn't going to add value, we don't want to do it. And so if it doesn't map, we don't do it. And then we want to make sure that once we find out what's going on now, make sure all the requirements map to that. There are some rare exceptions. And then we need to have design elements that map to all the requirements. We have to implement all the design items, and then we have to test and accept everything. Now, there are a couple of other things going on here. We can have requirements for how we do all the things, and we may also inject requirements in for non-functional stuff that probably really links to here in terms of cost-benefit analysis and so on, but you can think of them as being injected. And so, right. The way the BABOK talks about requirements traceability is really in terms of hierarchical organization. All the design elements have to make sense relative to each other. And you can think of this as kind of a top-down tree structure. If you're going to imagine an aircraft, there are tons of subsystems that make that up, and each of those has tons of subsystems. So that's just one example, and that might be more of a product than a process, but there you go. And then what we want to do is make sure all the things map across both dimensions. So you can either picture them coming in at right angles this way, or coming down from the top like I've shown. It's just more convenient to draw it this way. And you can also break down epics into features, into tests, and so on, and then you get testable things. So there's a way to track this. And the problem is there is no tool like Rally and Jira that does all this. The problem with most tracking products that are out there is they can really only track across one phase, and what you need is something that maps across every phase and does the traceability. Traceability is just really difficult. But what I'm proposing here is a template for tracking items. Here's a to-do item, and then we have our hierarchical or epic feature, whatever breakdown. And then once we get to the lowest level leads, we assign those to be worked on, send them for review. They get approved by people in serial or parallel and then completed. When things actually pass whatever review, they actually spawn new items in the to-do column of the next phase. And that's where the magic happens. And this link backwards here shows the iteration that happens within each phase. So project planning is just the beginning part of project management, and you can think of project management as a wrapper that goes around all the other activities. So PMs are mostly worried about the environment and the resources for a project and keeping track of it. And BAs are worried about the requirements and how the problem is going to be solved. So they work hand in glove. They have different concerns, but I really think that VA should understand the entire life cycle and they should be involved in every phase. Typically, if you look at the BABOK, it really stops at the design phase. Once you've compared options and chosen one, the BABOK says you're kind of done. You don't worry so much about the implementation and testing. It's a little more gray than that, but that's kind of the way it goes. So the intended use is figure out what we're gonna do, figure out what the goals are, figure out what constitutes success. Then we're going to figure out what we are going to include, not include the rest, and so on. And here's where I'm gonna blow through a lot of detail. So we can dig into this at some future time. I've been told that a lot of the material I present is kind of complicated. If you have any questions, please ask. Ask in writing, ask when this is all over, and so on. I would be happy to elucidate, and maybe that'll help me present this better in the future. So reasons to omit and simplify things. And I think of this in terms of simulation. Either things are out of scope, we won't include them. If we don't have enough data or understanding of what's going on, we might not include things. If the impact is small, then we might not include something. Or if the items aren't active in the modes we're looking at, then we also don't have to take things into account. But just because you decide you can omit something or create a limitation, it should be documented so people know that's done. You can think of this if you write physics or engineering equations. There are giant homework problems for beginning engineers that give you a series of words or tell a story. You start with a standard equation and figure out what terms you can zero out. So those are simplifications. That's just way of thinking, one way of thinking about it. Again, the conceptual model, there isn't one set of tools or techniques or representations. You do it in any way that you and the customer agree on. I love diagrams. I love flow diagrams, physical layouts, flow charts. I love it all. Data diagrams, architecture diagrams, you name it. But there are ways to do text and lists and data structures and so much more. So this is where B is, well, learn what they don't know. There are a number of techniques in the techniques section we need to include in this phase. And I learned a lot through a lot of different things where I'm going that I've worked on with a wide variety of people at every level of customer organizations. And one thing you have to do, this is where probably more communication happens that's most difficult. So if you're working with implementation people on your team, you hopefully already have an relationship with them. So BAs are learning and translating machines. And here's where you have to have good communication skills, good personality, and respect and interest in those you're learning from. You always want to make sure they're the expert, they're comfortable, you respect them, and so on. And learning in a new field, here's the learning machine. That's called domain knowledge acquisition. Now, if you're in a single company, you're working on the same kinds of stuff all the time, you may not encounter a whole bunch of new stuff. But if you're an external consultant that's always going around talking to new people about new things, you have to be able to learn a lot and quickly. So then we talk about data. Cliff and Rohit have talked about that. You want to map where it comes from, where it's going, and how it has to be transformed, conditioned, and so on. They've talked about that. There are different kinds of data. I can go more into that in a future time, but just so you know it's here. By the way, one thing I came up with that the BABOK also talks about is the differentiation between nouns and verbs. So nouns or the nouns and verbs are what happens and who's doing who to what. That's quantitative. And then adjectives and adverbs are how many and how fast and so on. That's one is discovery, what's going on, and then data collection is a numeric characterization of everything. Requirements mostly come in functional and non-functional. Functional requirements are what the system does. is the actions, the behaviors, inputs, outputs, and so on. The actions and mechanisms that generate results. Non-functional is what the system is. It's the characteristics the system has to have to be valuable. Then we get into design, and that's what the solution will be made up of, whether it's a modification to something that already exists or whether we're building something new from scratch. We may have to consider many options that have to be evaluated across many criteria. We may do trade-offs. We will do cost-benefit analyses. Like I said, the BABOK kind of ends at design. But in reality, you should know about what happens and be involved in all the rest of it. So implementation is where you build and deploy things. There's a lot of strategy and so on that needs to happen. Training, deployment, documentation, handover, delivery, all those are parts of it. Testing comes in two major forms. Verification of the operation, usability, and outputs. That means, did what you built work the way you intended it to? And those are things you tend to be able to test automatically. They're very amenable to yes or no. Is it more than 3 or less than 3 or less than equal to 3 or whatever? That you can automate. But the other kinds of tests is validation, and that is what we built the right thing we should have built? And that is more driven by the requirements, traceability, expert judgment, people's feelings about things, people saying they know it when they see it, and so on. And there's a lot of expert judgment involved in that. So that's the key difference of want to communicate. And testing may involve a lot of special skills and training and so on, and a lot of different types of stakeholders can be involved in it. Now, one thing I know is that BAs often get involved with user acceptance testing, and that helps elucidate the design in the operation. So when I say that the BABOK kind of stops at design, it's a little mishmashy. They're really involved to some degree in everything. They certainly can help track across all the phases, and you know, that's the way it is. All right, then you accept things either fully, partially, or not at all. And you have to think about a lot of considerations like documentation, training, hardware, software, backup licenses, and goodness knows what. All right. And then we close everything that's kind of a project management thing. Ideally, we'll do lessons learned and table or notes and so on. A lot of times these things don't happen, and they really should. Now, for ongoing projects or programs, you may never have formal flows. But if you're working as an external consultant or vendor, for third parties, there is usually a defined endpoint someplace for contractual reasons or nothing else. So we are doing all this work within 4 contexts you should be aware of. The process or the product is what you create or modify. That's either what's there or what you're gonna build new. The solution is the thing you create or the modification that provides the value you want. So those are, you can imagine this being a process with some standard components in it. And then you can imagine a changed version of this at the end. The delta between the old and the new, that's the solution. The engagement is the process I've been talking about. It's how we arrange our activities and know when to apply certain techniques and communication styles in a given situation. And then all of that is done in a certain kind of environment. So you should be aware. I'll invite you to think about how much of each element are you part of. A lot of times BAs get squeezed into one small part, maybe requirements engineering and so on, but really they should be involved across the whole scope of activities. I have tried to talk about whether the 50 BABOK techniques address the solution or engagement or both. A need to add the solution in the environment, and B, when we went through the techniques the last time, I tried to start a conversation about this so we could review it all, and I kind of let that go. But we should actually revisit this as a group. Same thing with different software tools. These are based on surveys I did when I gave presentations to various IIBA chapters. One thing you need to know is that you can have extended project life cycles. So you can imagine building something using a standard engagement with all the phases, but then you start running it, and that puts you into an operation and maintenance phase. And all the modifications and service you do to it, all of those can be standalone projects on their own that use the same engagement structure I've been talking about. Finally, when we come to the end, we need to scrap the entire system or replace it with something new. We have an end of life thing, and that can be a whole another engagement on its own. So let's talk about the structure of the BABOK. So we have the intro, the key concepts. The 6 knowledge areas are chapter 3 to 8. I will go into that. That's kind of the meat of what we study as BAs. That in chapter 10 is the techniques. We talk less about chapter 9 and 11. We kind of implicitly understand those, but probably we should pay more attention to them. So I have mapped here the chapters 3 through 8 across the top and put all the activities I identified along the side. And what you see is I came up with the best map I could of what a BABOK activity maps to what kind of project phase or engagement phase. And what I found, you can quibble about these, but they mostly go from upper left to lower right. So the BABOK is telling a story kind of in order of what you do during a project. Whereas I am telling a similar story in a different way. And the BABOK in my framework are written in very general ways. So they can apply to any project or any effort. They do not tell you do this, do this, do this, Shangri-La, because that does not exist. All right, now we will compare business analysis and many different certifications you can earn to project management, Agile and Scrum, process improvement, data analysis, cybersecurity, system architectures, and skill and product-based skills and certifications and methodologies. So different organizations there across the top, they will give certs in different practice areas. So I want to briefly talk about all these practice areas and do a summing up at the end that shows that all these practice areas are really, they're teaching you to do the same thing. So some general observations is that every organization tells the story of what it does, even across its many certifications, in very similar ways. So you may recognize this diagram, but the phases are for IIBA's data certification or data analysis. And there are 5 phases you still iterate within, and between them, the format of the PDF that talks about this body of knowledge is very similar to the BABOK, but it's the same idea, same format, but different subject matter. And I have learned all this stuff by maintaining and consuming hundreds of hours of material to maintain certs and get to know people and become a better being. So here's the framework for what project management used to talk about. There are 10 practice areas, and then you've got phases. You initiate, you plan, you execute, you monitor and control, and then you close. And during that time, you worry about what you're building, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholders. And it didn't change much from 3 to 6, but in 7, what they did is dropped about half the page count. So here is BABOK 6, right? And it's a big, thick honking book about like the BABOK. But here's PMBOK 7. It's skinny, and it's actually almost 2 separate books. And it's kind of agile, and it's kind of about the environment in the artifacts. So they've gotten a little weird about it. Not everybody's happy about it, but what they're really moving toward, and I see more and more of this in the management literature, is it's all about communication and iteration. And that's the story I'm trying to tell. So Agile and Scrum, again, about communication and iteration. It was created to address a series of problems that were extant in the late 90s. People weren't talking to each other. They were trying to build these big, brittle, monolithic things, and they were failing because they weren't talking to each other, and they weren't doing stuff often enough. And so that's what that's all about. Now, as a practical matter, large transformation projects still fail like 70% of the time. So it's crazy. So the Agile and Scrum are basically trying to change the world. Some people will say that all the programming stuff that came out of XP should be part of Agile. I say it's actually different. It's not like you can have a crummy IT shop in a waterfall environment either. But we had somebody talk about that last year. He opines that they are the same thing, but it doesn't matter if you know all the parts that make the thing up. It doesn't really matter. And there are some more. Oh, I will say, most certifications for Scrum are given out at a low level. You can move above being a basic Scrum Master. There are 2 more levels you can go up to being advanced and a certified instructor level guru or whatever. Most should be pretty basic. As far as I'm concerned, there probably only needs to be one basic cert for everything. And a lot of what goes on now is just trying to make money at craft. Process improvement is about Lean Six Sigma. Lean is about doing more with less. It's about efficiency. Six Sigma is about reducing errors and variation, however, and that is actually what reduces errors and waste. So it's about quality. Total quality management says to find standards and meet them. Deming was a big guy. He had his own way of thinking about that, and there are many others. So the process improvement stuff, the hardest cert to earn, and the one with the largest body of knowledge was the Six Sigma Black Belt stuff. Then we have data analysis. We've talked about this, so I won't go into that in too much detail. Cybersecurity, so most of us probably are going to be experts in it, but we have to know how to talk to the people that are and ensure that their expertise is applied in the proper areas. So their social and organizational system access internal security, communication security, and other kinds of remote access. That's what we have to worry about as the briefest possible overview. Then we have system architecture. There are a lot of ways to think about this. There are different methods. You should use the tools appropriate to your industry and your customers. When the fella came on last year and talked about Archimate and shared this diagram, I really, that was an eye-opening moment for me because it really helped me understand a lot of things. I usually work from the middle layer, which is what the thing needs to do, then work out to how it's going to be hosted and implemented and what business units are going to support it. So we have to break things down. The way we do that is slightly different in every practice area. And let's, for example, think about this is the requirement traceability, or is related somewhat to a work breakdown structure from project management. Agile has SAFe, which requires a lot of communication and iteration to keep all these different process flows in sync with each other. So imagine we've got two Scrum teams working from a shared backlog, and they have to stay in sync. Here's another project team working on a synchronized set of sprints, working from an independent backlog. We've got some continuous work going on here using Kanban or triage or bug fixing, and we have some other stuff going on in waterfall format, and all that has to be kept in sync. So again, that's a lot of communication and iteration. And there are other kinds of diagrams from project management. Every practice area has a bunch of how-to information. If you break out the stuff that's different, you can think that every practice area uses communication and iteration with the different tool banks, so there is an assist together. And in my mid-30s, I read this book by this guy, doesn't matter, and I realized that he's asking the big questions in life, but from his area of expertise. And I realized that everybody, no matter what they're doing, is as ultimately asking the big questions. What's it all for? How do we do it? How do we serve others? So here's a summary. I will say that everything is a loop. This is the last line. Every management practice is converging on communication and iteration with a different tool bag. These first items come from Scrum, or they come from Six Sigma. And the OODA loop actually, I think, came from naval aviation, and it's more of a high-speed situational combat-oriented thing. The 5 whys should drill down, but you have to, if the drilling doesn't get you anywhere, you need to move sideways and drill again. And there's more to say. things take a long time. It's taken 150 years to figure out thermodynamics. We still aren't done yet. We learned a major new thing about water only in the last 10 or 15 years. If we can still learn stuff that's new about something that has been studied that much, imagine what else may be out there. So that's all I have to say. I guess we're running up right on time. If you have questions, I'll be happy to stay and answer or try.
Okay, it
We
looks
did
like
have a
we
couple
do.
questions in the chat, if you got a moment to look at them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Solution evaluation might be part of design, but that's the way I think about it in the BABOK. However, it makes sense that it's also kind of part of implementation test. So maybe that's not the way the BABOK intended it, and maybe that's something when they do the next BABOK we should talk about.
Okay.
It's definitely part of continuous improvement. Yeah, so data capture in cybersecurity, it's part of the design and requirements of any system. You have to identify what's going on and what you need for your context. That's why you always have to talk about all these things in very general terms.
Okay. Anything else?
Did we live?
We did.
All right.
I have a really important question. Back to that swing, is that East Coast swing, Lindy Hop, or West Coast swing?
And
All of 'em.
Balboa and Charleston and Blues and Shag, Carolina Shag, Collegiate Shag, Baltimore Shag, St. Louis Shag, and I think there was a Chicago Shag that was called the Imperial. And they were all the animal dances, swing walk, Peabody, a bunch of one-step dances, so all of the above. I wasn't any good at it, but I did it with a certain amount of enthusiasm.
That's awesome. Well, folks, thank you. And Bob, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and the things that we've been able to gather from you today. I have a commercial advertisement here on January 29th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Join the BA martial artist, Paula Bell. She's going to be talking to me about, well, with me about handling teams carefully, how to get the most and best out of each of your team members, depending on who they are and what they've had and what personality they have and everything. So we're going to work on that. Bob is going to put a link to his presentation in the notes, and so you can access it there. And if you have any questions, reach out to Bob or myself on LinkedIn. We'll be glad to help you out. Next week, again, we're going to be talking to Cliff about using LinkedIn to its fullest potential. Cliff, how many contacts do you have on LinkedIn now? It's like 30,000.
Well, 30,000 is your limit, but I'm right around 27, 28,000. So I'm
And
getting
he
close.
actively works it, and the benefits that he's seen from working it are great. We're also going to talk about an ideal layout for your LinkedIn profile if you're looking for a job. And we're just going to touch on that briefly, but I think people need to know things like you can customize your link for LinkedIn, just the basics. Okay. Check out Bob's website. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I'm doing the link right now.
Okay. All right. Check out Bob's website. He has a lot more there, guys. He's done simulations and mechanical engineering, things that most of us never touch and we can learn from. So I will see y'all next week, and I hope y'all have a safe and wonderful week. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
By
Bye.
the way, if you're ever going to listen to this, speed it up a lot. It's more tolerable.
You're just fine, Bob. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.